Welcome back to the fourth little video lecture related to Chapter 14, Unit 1, or the first part of it, which is looking at the connections between spending and GDP. So I'm going to fast forward up to where we were with the last slide, which is talking about equilibrium in the aggregate demand model. Okay, so equilibrium is noted here at the point where at the points where our aggregate demand function and where aggregate demand function intersects this 45-degree line. So if output is greater than aggregate demand, so if we're in an area where the 45-degree line is above our aggregate demand function, that implies that output is greater than demand, or income is greater than demand. Households are saving. Households are not buying as much output as firms are producing. On the other hand, if we are to the left of Y star, if Y is less than Y star, then the implication here is that households are spending more than firms are producing, or they are spending more than they are earning. So the idea here is that when the economy is below Y star, we're going to expect growth. The idea here is that GDP is going to increase, or income is going to increase as expenditure outpaces production. And on the right, when Y is greater than Y star, the idea is that spending is less than total output, spending is less than total income. And the neat thing about this model is that it helps us predict how a change in autonomous spending, so spending that has nothing to do with income, can ultimately affect overall GDP, can ultimately affect equilibrium GDP. So we start with our gray model, C0 plus I1. So this is the middle line here. And the idea is that if we have an increase in, say, autonomous spending, households start spending more for some reason, regardless of what their income is, then we're going to expect an increase in equilibrium GDP. The blue Y star is greater than the gray Y star. And the red Y star, when C0 is less, is due to less spending, GDP equilibrium is going to fall. So what's the mechanics? What is the dynamic by which we arrive at a higher or lower GDP if spending changes? The key idea here is that spending by one sector of the economy is income by another sector of the economy. So let's suppose that let's suppose that autonomous consumption increases. Suppose C0 increases. People spend more because they feel confident about the future. This would be a jump from point 1 to point 2 in our function. So if C0 increases to the blue C0, which is greater than greater than original spending, which is what this model up here was showing us, then we're going to expect a leap. We're going to expect more spending regardless of income. So we go from 1 to 2. Now, as more spending enters the economy, earnings should rise. If I buy stuff from a firm, that firm is going to see increased revenue. And they are going to use that revenue to pay some of their suppliers or to pay their workers or whatever. And as that income circulates through the economy, we expect more spending. So we're going to move not just up from 1 to 2, but from 2 to 3. We're going to expect movement along our new aggregate demand curve as earnings trickle through the economy and translate into more spending. And eventually we will be back in equilibrium at point 3, where our new aggregate demand function intersects that 45-degree line. We're going to expect the reverse if we have a decrease in any of the components of demand. So just for variety, on this slide, let's imagine that there is a decrease in investment expenditure. So if I0 is less, if the red I0 is less than the gray I0, then we should see a bumping down of our aggregate demand function. So this was the gray line was our initial position, And the red line represents a new scenario where we have the same autonomous consumption as originally, but now we have less investment expenditure. So how does this work? Well, we're going to expect an initial jump from 1 to 2 as investment decreases. If investment expenditure decreases, we're going to expect less spending at all levels of income because firms just aren't spending as much. If firms decide to spend less, that means that they may be paying their workers less, or they may be canceling contracts with suppliers, and this will translate into less income earned throughout the system. So the movement from 2 to 3 is due to the change in spending leading to a decrease in earnings. And as earnings fall, consumption-induced expenditure falls too. So eventually we're going to arrive at a new equilibrium point 3 where our new aggregate demand line intersects our 45